Welcome to Trust the Journey. I'm Melanie Curtis.
And I'm Jason Moletsky.
Thank you, legit, for joining us today.
Yeah, our mission is living and learning, laughing and loving together with you.
We're here to grow and contribute through our practice of openness, honesty, vulnerability, humility, and trust, trusting the entire journey.
Yeah, and on that journey, we often talk about plant medicines, psychedelics, and other avenues of healing. When we do, we are sharing for informational purposes only. We're not doctors or therapists, and we don't promote doing anything illegal.
Inside us all, we have a deep, powerful knowing. We encourage curiosity, healing, and exploration of this consciousness.
Damn straight. Together, our handle is trustthejourney.today. Individually, you can find her at melaniecurtis.com and me at jasonmoletsky.com.
Thank you all again so much for being with us. On to the show.
Awesome. I'm so happy that we're back here today talking about spirituality again.
And we're back.
Yeah. So we wrapped up the last episode, and it was like basically like as soon as we push stop, I'm like, gosh, I didn't talk about this and I forgot about that. And there was so much more depth. There was so much more to talk about. And we just immediately said, let's just do another follow-up episode around the same topic.
Yeah, well, and I think it's such a big topic, and it's also a really important one for us and for other folks. So I think it's great that we're digging in even more. So yes, I'm on board.
So there's a huge theme that's been like the main piece of my life for quite a few years now. I would say probably like 8 years, and it's become more and more and more clear to me with a lot more understanding of myself and my needs. And that theme has been my mental body, my physical body, and my spiritual body, and the practices relating to maintaining those aspects of self, and how much energy am I putting towards each one, and am I even thinking about each one, or is it positive energy? Is it negative energy? How am I being helpful to this part of myself? How am I being harmful to this part of myself?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say basically since I started my plant medicine journey, really with the journey with ayahuasca, like that part of it is when this whole like self-awareness started to really bubble to the surface in alignment with having physical health issues coming to the surface and starting to have more and more awareness. I'm like, well, things aren't right. I'm having problems. I'm starting to be ill, and I'm needing to think about my physical body more. And so now this, like the mental health starting to degrade, physical health starting to degrade, and recognizing the spiritual health side's coming in and being like, hey, this needs balance, this whole thing, right?
Hey,
so,
you, tapping you on the shoulder. Hey, tap, 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 taparoo. Yeah. I mean, I certainly can echo just briefly that, my spiritual life, my spiritual self, my spiritual practice, really opened up certainly as well when I started using plant medicine. And it started because of, dark nights of the soul. It was sort of an answer to an unanswerable question in my life and myself. It was sort of a just desperation, and I think there's an interesting door that opens when we feel, when we feel desperation or we feel despair and we don't know what to do. I think those are often looked at as bad things, but for me, it's opened doors to things that have been so crucial to my deeper knowledge of myself, deeper healing, and deeper awareness of what's possible in myself and in this life and with other people and all of the things that we care about.
The whole darker side of spirituality, because it's a full spectrum, right? Like there's like the white light and the black darkness, like the dark arts, Satanism, right? Blood rituals, like the really dark side. And there's a full range of every spectrum from black to white, in between of every color of gray, and I think I touched on this in the previous episode, but my upbringing in Christianity was not something I really enjoyed, right? Like, it was painful to be kind of forced into the religious model of modern Christianity and have some troubling experiences within that model and ping pong around inside of different churches and be very confused as a young boy, about like
Yeah.
what to believe, because what I'm being told doesn't line up with kind of like my feelings inside about what I
Yeah.
think should feel good or not. And then what I read in the books doesn't relate to the way people act in the world, and there's all this variation. And I'm like, but didn't a man write this on a page, So there's all these
Yeah.
questions about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. My experience as a young person with Christianity, because that was what was exposed to me as well. Why I point to this is that mine was not necessarily painful, but it was more like, I'm just gonna, this is what I'm told. And just sort of being fed the thing, not questioning the thing, but also not really caring, right? Really just being like, okay, whatever. And really just focusing on other parts of life and, in a sense, ignoring the spiritual life. So yeah, we started going to church, but really didn't go much. So it was one of those things that was not uplifted for me in any significant way. So I just was sort of able to automatically ignore it, deprioritize it as a result of those influences.
It wasn't prioritized in your family.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a single mom, right? And she was very much born again Christian. She went from kind of, a rougher lifestyle with some substance abuse in it and some rough family stuff to like, I found God and God's my savior. And now everything's going to be okay. Having faith, right? Like faith. She got faith that everything's going to be okay and it's going to be all right, and latched onto that idea. But I could tell even as a young boy that she didn't believe it
Mm,
because we kept switching churches, but we would go to church 2 or 3 times a week, right?
mm,
Like Sunday service, never miss, but sometimes Friday or Saturday evenings and Wednesday evenings, and we went to like 7 or 8 different Methodist, Pentecostal, Episcopalian, Catholic, Anglican, Pentecost. What we just ping ponged all around. And I was just like, what are we doing here?
right,
Having a
right.
hard time believing this when we're this kind of unstable with it all, like,
Right. Having a hard time believing this.
yeah,
From that
yeah,
alone, much less what you were seeing cognitive dissonance between what was existing in the world and what you were reading in scripture.
totally, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, the blind faith thing, it's funny because you were describing how we pushed end on the last episode and you're like, oh my God, there's so much I didn't talk about, this and that. I had the other experience where I'm like preparing for this episode being like, oh man, what else can I say? Not that there isn't so much. I'm more saying that as a comical reflection on myself. But as I was thinking about it, what came up for me was this notion of blind faith and the danger of that, which is basically my experience being told what to believe and then just not ever questioning it, just believing it. And then only when I had a crisis of faith, this loss of faith, do I meet these sort of breakdowns I've described when I was like, my friends told me they were atheists. So I was like, okay, yeah, I don't really know what it is. So I'm an atheist. But then having this, finally, what was in me, my truth starting to bubble up. And then, and only then, was I beginning to question, what do I really think? What do I really believe? What do I really feel? And so that crisis, that loss of faith, that deep questioning was really what helped me start to actually access my own true spiritual self.
So let me ask you a question. When you were a little girl, did you pray like at night before bed? Like,
Not much, but a little. Yeah,
Yeah.
because influenced by my gram and
Yeah.
my, just that, again, that Christian, loose Christian influence, but not much, very
Yeah.
little.
So I did that. I did the like get on my knees, turn towards my bed, like put my hands in front of my, close my eyes, and like talk to God. Right?
Mm,
Like pray to a God that I'm supposed to believe in, that I've never seen, that I have was just told exists and is like in a book that I know is written by Matthew, John, you
mhm.
know, I know the guys' names who wrote the book. They actually put their names on the top of each chapter, right? Like,
Right,
so a bunch of guys, well, all guys, right? All men wrote
right,
a bunch of books and they put all the books together. And then I'm supposed to believe the story that's in there. And I'm like,
right.
okay, like I want to, but every time I closed my eyes and prayed, I felt like I was trying to believe, like
Yeah,
really trying. I'm like, I want to be able to believe in this because I know that there's something in it that's good for me. Like I can
yeah,
believe that there's something here good for me. And I know that the intention behind all of this is like for me to have a deeper connection with our creator. And we had to have come from somewhere, right? We had to have come from somewhere. So I wanted to like understand that, but God was always kept at a distance. I couldn't talk to God. I could ask for prayers. I could pray for my family, my friends. I could ask for God to do good things in the world, to help my mom, to help my brother, to care about my dad. But my God didn't ever actually speak back, right? God was kept at a distance because the direct portal to God was through the church. The church has access to God. And
yep,
there's a power being wielded here, which means like there's the layman doesn't get direct access to spirituality, doesn't get to talk to God. You can ask, but it's a lot like the confessional thing, right? Like you go in behind the freaking screen and you're like, oh, I've been bad, like please forgive me, please ask God to forgive me, if
right,
because you have contact with God because you're you're the minister, the preacher, the father, whatever the name is that we want to give the nun, you know. So I always felt like I distrusted the church in a huge way because of what I saw through reading the Bible and looking at, what Christianity actually did in the
yeah,
world of like destroying cultures and moving through the dark ages of just like absolutely obliterating beautiful cultures, completely different and just enforcing their own concepts. And I've never saw the change to that, and so I struggled so deeply with as a day, like I want to relate to this God, but I don't really want this to be my God because this God fucks shit up in a really nasty way that I don't really want to be part of. And then there's this power where I don't actually get to, talk to him,
yeah,
him.
him. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I really am very curious what's on your list. I want to hear more. And again, we can talk more pragmatically about what we do when we lose faith, but I really kind of want to keep going and hear more about what you were super compelled to share more about when we closed last time.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Yeah.
So when my dad died, I was 9, and it was super confusing. I didn't understand at all the whole concept, right? Like I had had a dog die, but it was so foreign because my dad wasn't near me. He was in another country, and I never saw his dead body. There was no closure. He was cremated and shipped back as cremated remains, and I never saw the remains. And so this was this weird concept. He's disappeared. This is gone. And then, but when my mother died, I found her when she died, and I was 12 when she died. And I walked into her bedroom and found her, asleep, dead in her bed. And so I understood that completely. That made full sense, even though it was a horrible, panic, terrifying moment for a child. I was very understand. I knew what had happened there. And then I fucking lost faith. I was like, "Fuck you, God!" Right? Fuck you.
Right. Right.
Fuck you, God. Like, what kind of a fucking story is this for a little boy to receive as like, what is this about? You know, and so I embraced atheism, and I was like, fuck, there is no God. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I opposed the idea of a God because everything I've been brought up and taught was about this loving God, this merciful God, this beautiful God. And then I'm getting handed the shit stick, you know, and I'm like, this is not what I've been taught is God is about. And so I blocked out the idea of God. I rejected the idea of God. And timing was perfect. I was 12. I was becoming a teenager, you know, so I was all about rejection, as teenagers are, right? We're
Yeah.
programmed on our
Yeah.
cellular level to reject our, you know, so that we'll leave the nest.
Yeah.
And then I encountered LSD, and I started to have deeper questions. I
Mm-hmm.
started to question whether or not God was, maybe something had to create all this, you know? And then I encountered psilocybin, and then I started to really, really have questions. And I had more pain come into my life. I had more things taken away. You know, I had a little girl and raised her for a few years, and then lost her. And then found out she wasn't my little girl. And so more of this shit stick kind of experience. And continuing to dive down the psilocybin experience in a very painful way. Like I ate a bunch of mushrooms in my 20s, and I had some really pivotal experiences that pointed me down the path of maybe you should think about things differently. And I'd been exploring my own spirituality through skydiving, through looking at death through the lens of like, you know, what does life actually look like up to its borders? You know, what does the border look like? What do the edges look like?
Yep.
And I talked about this in the last episode. I talked about how I continued on this path. I encountered LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, and then along came DMT,
Mm.
right? And when I smoked DMT for the first time, the whole thing that God was somewhere else at a distance, that changed. This thing where you know, when I was a little boy, when I prayed and I was praying to an imaginary character in a book, when I smoked DMT, and then what eventually became my ayahuasca practice of drinking DMT, connected me to the spirit world. And connect, you know, in combination with that 5-MeO DMT also solidifying my, without a doubt, like without any fucking doubt in my mind, without a fucking doubt, that the creators, the ones responsible for everything that is happening here, are accessible through those mediums. And very clear to myself, these are not drugs. These are like windows. They're tools. They're medicines, or they're technology. The right word is technologies. They're biotechnologies, which give us access to other dimensions that exist all the time. And it doesn't mean we get to like romp around freely in these dimensions. It just means like a portal opens, a window opens, and we can experience and connect with a complete other universe.
It's fascinating, right? The whole, like, with zero doubt. There
Zero.
is there is so little that that can apply to in this experience, this version of the human experience. And I say that not in a bad way, just as an observation, because there's a joke almost that I make where I'm careful about what I say I'm certain about, because I
Yeah.
almost always eat my words.
Oh, yeah.
So for there to be that conviction, that level of certainty coming from you, that's notable. That's notable. And I wonder, for somebody who's listening that isn't wanting to go down the psychedelic route, who isn't wanting to or is afraid, or I don't know, just hears that and go, oh, that's not for me, therefore I won't be able to access that or whatever. What would you say to that
Well,
person?
DMT is it's an endogenous compound. It exists in our own bodies. We don't have to go externally to access dimethyltryptamine. It's produced within our pineal gland. It is the God molecule, essentially. It's what is commonly referred to as. So we're not talking about needing to access DMT through ayahuasca or needing to smoke DMT. You can inject DMT. Like, you don't have to get it from exogenous sources. You can get it endogenously through breathwork practices,
Yep.
right? It's
Oh,
yeah.
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 I probably have shared this on the show before. I did not share it in the last episode, but one of the most profound breathwork sessions I've ever had, built on some of my psychedelic experiences with processing my grandmother's passing and the fear of my mom passing. My mom is still alive and well, but I had this incredible breathwork experience where I saw quite clearly my grandmother's hospital bed with my mom sitting next to her and me holding my mom's shoulders, which is something I've lived in this lifetime. That was the experience of my grand passing. And then it sort of it's like blurred, like almost like a cross dissolve in a video edit or something like that, where it sort of morphed into my mom in a bed and me sitting next to her, but she was really old, which was a wonderful thing for me to see, because it was sort of further healing that fear of losing my mom. It was more like I'll be with her, and again, the specificity remains to be seen, but just the fact that I have time with her. I'll be with her. I'm with her. Just that like
Yeah.
beautiful multi-generational thing. And that I don't I don't imagine how I would have accessed that without that breathwork session. And it wasn't something I brought. It wasn't an intention that I brought to the session. It was something that simply emerged because I was connecting to that spiritual God molecule, the DMT that's in me that helps me go to these places.
So there's an ancient practice called Kundalini meditation. And the concept of Kundalini is that there is an energy that lives at the base of our spine. Essentially, it's the first 8 cells of the body that are formed following conception. And that those 8 cells are in our sacrum. So the source of our being, because our body it's a repeating pattern. It's replication, right? Cellular replication. So there's an egg and there's a sperm. The sperm enters the egg, and then the cell divides once. It divides twice. Now there's 4. It divides again. There's 8, and this is the root of the being. Okay,
Yep.
and this energy, those cells form the sacrum of the spine right at the base. And so that's the root of being. It's your root chakra. Okay. And your energy body roots to the earth, connects to everything else energetically through this chakra. Like, this is our grounding source. Okay. And energies flow upwards, up and out and around, and down and in and around. They flow in both directions. All magnetic fields work the same way. Okay. So why do I know all this stuff? Is because this has been my spiritual practice, has been to like pursue an understanding of all of these things. All right. So that Kundalini meditation is about squeezing the abdomen at the lower part of the body, tightening up your pelvic floor. It's kind of like you would, like, if you had to go to the bathroom, you'd kind of hold it, right? You like tighten your pelvic floor. You're like pull everything tight. And then you start to tighten like your bladder, like kind of pull your lower tummy in. And then you start to tighten your stomach, and then you start to tighten your core, and then you start to bring it up and up, and you create this tension. And what it does is we have this channel that runs all the way from the root of our spine and it goes all the way up our spine, all the way to the base of our skull, and it connects to the pituitary and the pineal gland. Okay. And within that channel is cervical spinal fluid. And cervical spinal fluid is like an oil. It's a clear fluid, and it carries the essence of our life energy. Our life force is carried in that cervical spinal fluid. It's what cradles the nervous system. The nervous system is suspended in this fluid, and the energy, literally the electrical force energy that moves up and down your spine, happens on a lunar cycle. It moves following the moon every month, and we're connected to the universe through these cycles. And when we do this Kundalini meditation where we tighten up and we squeeze and we like literally pump the fluid up into the brain, we cause the fluid to come up and create more pressure inside of the pineal gland. And inside the pineal gland, there's all these crystals. There's these little rhomboidic crystals. And the way that this works is when you have rhomboid shaped crystals, and they're literally crystalline structures, when you compress them, when you put them under pressure, they create what's called piezoelectric and a charge. So if you ever have a lighter where you like click a little lighter and it just clicks and it like creates a little electric source and it lights a flame, that's a piezoelectric charge. You have them on like barbecues and cigarette lighters and that kind of stuff. Well, our pineal gland is the same thing. It has these rhomboidic crystals in it. And when we pressurize it, it produces a charge of energy, and it ignites the energy in that system. And it sends a charge through our aura. And that is what literally charges up our energetic field.
Wow.
So when you did the breath work and you were laying on the floor and you were doing these strong, repetitive, pressurized breaths, what was happening was you were increasing pressure on your cervical spinal fluid and creating a charge within your pineal gland, which is activating the DMT that's active in there, and it's connecting you to the spirit world, and it's allowing you to have this lucid, conscious experience that is directly sourced through an interdimensional, timeless space.
Yes, timeless.
Yeah.
We've talked about that. Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't think I ever knew that. I don't think I knew that. I probably have heard stuff centered around some of that in the past, but you know how you aren't always ready to receive information. So we need to hear it more than once. We were talking about this before we started recording about like, it's okay to do to be repetitive in some cases because we need to hear stuff more than once. The way that I hear something today might be is like almost certainly going to be very different to how I received it a year ago or more. So I feel like I've never heard that before, even though I probably have. The sponsor of today's episode is Great Spirit Farm. Yes. Love having Great Spirit Farm with us, and specifically their Ayahuasca microdose tincture. It is a natural MAOI antidepressant and anti-anxiety. Great Spirit Farm describes the feeling as a warm hug. It can help you access deep creativity, flow, intuition, and improve vivid dream recall, which actually has totally been my experience.
So what is exactly in the bottle is the ayahuasca vine itself. So this is a tincture extraction, double extraction tincture that contains the Banisteriopsis caapi vine. Now, the particular vine that this has been extracted from has been growing in Florida now for over 25 years. And the ayahuasca vine does not contain DMT, so that makes this tincture 100% legal in all 50 states.
Yeah, Great Spirit Farm recommends starting with 1 to 3 dropperfuls and increasing your dose gradually from there until you feel the effects. There are no known contradictions with antidepressants, and always check with your doctor and only take as directed.
And what's really great about what Great Spirit Farm is doing is they're making sure that 10% of all the sales are returned to the Shipibo tribe, honoring the medicine's indigenous roots with active reciprocity. Now, if you want to try this tincture out for yourself, you can go to the website. That is ayadose.com, AYADOSE.com, and you can enter our discount code TTJ10 to get 10% off your order. Again, that's ayadose.com and all caps TTJ10 to get 10% off your order. Have you seen my back piece, my tattoo on my back?
I have.
So the tattoo on my back is a visual representation of this energetic circuit, this energetic body. The whole Kundalini story is told many ways. It's told about it's a reference to there's very powerful sexual energy in Kundalini energy because it's a embodiment of gender, of duality. And so there's on my back, there's a pair of snakes and they're intertwined and they go from the base of my spine up my spine and they go in and out over a period. They intertwine 5 times. And those 5 crossings are like the double helix DNA, right? Of what our beings are made out of, which is literally the code that makes up who we are as an organism. And the reason why I have those 5 crossings happening is because it's holding the bottom 5 chakras in place. Okay. And those energy bodies, those energy fields are tuned to specific resonance frequencies. And those frequencies are aligned with the visual spectrum of colors so that they go red, orange, yellow, green, blue, right? Reggie Biv, the rainbow. And the 5 at the bottom are the platonic solids. They are also aligned to shapes. So those shapes, these are sacred geometry. Okay, those shapes are the 5 shapes that define every single structure in this reality are made out of those 5 shapes. Okay, so literally the building blocks of reality are held in place by these fields of energy that make up the bottom part of the tattoo on my back, which is Kundalini. Okay. Now, the 6th one is an indigo color, and that is the 3rd eye chakra. And that is where the snakes untwine, where they start to open up and unravel from each other and the DNA separates. So everything below that point is a representation of the physical. Everything above that point is a representation of the metaphysical, where we're no longer in a place of physical reality. We're in a place of the metaverse, the metaphysics, right?
Yeah.
An energetic place. And so the 3rd eye looks into this place and it allows us to see from one world to the other. Okay. And the snakes come out and they separate and they look back at each other and they have eyes on top, and the 2 snakes look across from each other. And they are representation of gender, right? Because when our bodies are made up of our mother and our father, and those 2 pieces wind together to make up who we are. So we're literally half man, half woman, right? And there's only one chromosome, one tiny little chromosome that ticks one way or the other that expresses whether we express masculine or feminine.
Yeah.
So the 3rd eye sits below those, and then the crown chakra right on the top of our head, which is often called to the 1,000-petal lotus flower. Okay, now what is this? What's this 1,000-petal lotus flower? Well, on my back, it's represented by a phi sacred geometry spiral that goes out in every direction, which is the pattern of the flower petals on the lotus flower. So where am I going with all this? This is very
I love it.
key.
I'm like,
okay.
I'm engrossed, honestly. I was just thinking like, oh my God, I'm getting this like live. How cool.
Okay.
Keep going. Keep going.
So the reason why it's referred to as the 1,000-petal lotus flower is both because of the sacred geometry reference that's hidden inside of that teaching that you have to dig for to understand, because you need to go further. It's not just right there at the surface. This 1,000-petal lotus flower is like, it's every version of potential reality. It's like our soul truly blooming. And it's the top of this giant energetic magnetic field that exists over our body. So that flower opens up and expands, and the lotus flower is resilient and strong and beautiful. And it lives in these dark, mucky, goopy, sticky places. Oftentimes the flower will be covered in goo, and some of the sticky pond scum will have to be broken apart for this beautiful, really resilient flower to be able to bloom. Well, the patterning, like the spacing of the leaves in my personal spiritual journey, so this is like this big synergetic piece that comes back around, is sacred geometry showed up for me in the year 2000 in a way where somebody handed me a book, and it was the study of Victor Schauberger. He was a German naturalist, and he studied fluid dynamics. And one of my friends who was into this I was the beginning of my swooping career. He's like, "Hey, look at this. I think this is going to mean something to you." And it talked all about the water vortexes and how water spirals. And so I took what I saw in the book, and through the time I was spending time with psilocybin, I was spending time with LSD, I was able to look at the images in the book and the writing in the book and relate to the fluid dynamic concepts and see that the force, the way that nature wants energy to move in a fluid is through this natural, follow this line. Like there's a drawing of like how nature wants us to do it. So I started following that line through physical space while flying my wings to like imagine like I'm just going to mimic what nature does through its natural movement when it wants to move from one place to another, whether that's a tornado or whether that's a whirlpool. And so I used mathematics to map out the rate of turn and the rate of change, time of rate of change, to be able to match those shapes. So all of this ends up on my back in vivid color. So I've got a tattoo, goes from elbow to elbow, top of my neck to the base of my spine, which represents all of these concepts. And those 1,000 petals in the flower, each of them has an eye on it, on my tattoo. And that represents each version of us, each human form, each life, collective consciousness. All collective consciousness represented at the top, and all the energy coming up out of the top and coming back around and back into the bottom again. The universal flow of energy. There's a big crossover here, because what's happening is now I've got a blend going on. I've got a huge blend between Hinduism, which is where the Kundalini and the chakras come from, but the chakras are also in Buddhism. Okay. They're not. So now I've got these Eastern religions that are highly influenced, and there's a tie to mathematics and physics. Okay. So now I'm able to see physics through movement and sacred geometry and in all these natural life forms. I'm able to see the world, and I'm like, oh, look, I can see there's patterns everywhere.
Yeah.
And these patterns are sacred geometry, and they are represented through numerical functions, which are very commonplace things like phi or pi or phi, which are irrational numbers. I love that these are called irrational. They're called irrational because they never repeat. And these irrational numbers are mathematical constants that create change in the universe, right? So because they never repeat, because they're constantly changing, what is the one thing that is constant? And that is change, right? Like everything is always changing all the time. That's the nature of the universe. So pi and phi represent the masculine and feminine versions of these, the sacred geometry versions. And there's a ratio called the golden ratio, which is phi, 1.681, 1818. And this golden ratio is what creates all these beautiful curves and movements. All right, let me pull this all back together again. Okay?
I love it. Yeah, keep going.
Thank you. Catch a breath in here.
I know. I mean, this is awesome, Jay, because seriously, I feel happy to, in this place and time, with my current ability to absorb more of what you're sharing. I'm grateful, just grateful to even just be in conversation, or if like listening to a conversation like our listeners do, like I do on other shows, when we're really talking about stuff that is being shared in truth, which is obviously what I hear and feel from you always today as well. It also connects me to it, even if I don't fully understand it. And I feel my system relaxing, even just listening, So that's what's happening over here, in case you were wondering.
Thank you for sharing that. And you know what? Not fully understanding it is part of how it's supposed to be.
Yeah,
Okay.
that
So
makes
this,
sense.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we're not supposed to understand it, right? If we understood it, we're God,
There's
right? If we understand the whole thing, that's God's job, right? The reason why God is kept telling himself a story right now is to not feel alone. It's to have this like other versions of, and if you God, were like go back to the, just being omnipotent, then what else is there? You know, so we're not supposed to know.
so
So here
bringing it back.
I
Yeah.
want to bring it back to how mathematics have proven God to exist to me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Go
Because
ahead.
so what, I smoked some DMT and now I'm some druggie who smoked some
And
things
now
that had
you're
a
certain.
hallucination. And now like, fuck yeah, I saw
Yeah.
God, dude. Right.
And I
Yeah.
have the
Right. How
certainty
about,
that people are like, whatever, bro.
yeah. How about mathematics? Do we believe in mathematics? Right. Like, cause I'll believe in mathematics a lot more than I believe in the Bible. I'll just
Mm,
be clear, right?
yeah.
Like, and even then, mathematics are questionable, but because there's so many ways to look at it, right? But there's a code that we can see behind everything, which is math, okay? And math and music are the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is patterns and frequency. And so at some point in my life, a friend of mine, Dave Major, Clem,
Yeah, I know Clem.
walked by and he had a binder in his hand. And on the front of the binder, there was a picture. And on that picture was this emblem that I have tattooed in the middle of my chest. Okay.
Well,
This emblem on the middle of my chest is called Metatron's Cube. Right. What this is it's the it's the key to understanding all that is when it comes to mathematics and geometry and how it all got to be here. Metatron's cube is the fusion of the masculine and the feminine.
okay.
Okay. The straight lines are the masculine, the curved lines are the feminine. Okay. It's born out of out of the feminine, out of the circle, okay, or the sphere, but it only comes to exist when you intersect it with the masculine, which
Yeah.
is you take a single point. All right. I'm going to take you on the story of the flower of
Yeah.
life and
Uh-huh.
the creation of Metatron's cube. If you have a single point and that point is singular, that's omnipotent, right? Like omnipresent, one thing, singularity. Okay. Now, if you duplicate that, create duality. Okay. We have 2 points. Now, those points, no matter where they are relative to each other, only have each other to reference. Okay. If you have an infinite white space, there's nothing else. You have one point, you have another point. Now they can only reference each other because there are no other things in the universe. All right. So this story just happens to line up with the 7 days of creation written in the Bible. Just a little segue there. Okay. So on the first day, created light. Okay. Second day, we have a second point. Now, those 2 points reference each other. If one moves around the other, it creates a circle or a sphere. Okay. It creates the egg, right? Like the very first thing, like a circle. Okay. So we went from a line to a circle. Okay. And now if you take that segment of line and just move it outside the circle, move it away, try to leave. Okay. What it does is immediately creates another circle because now you can scribe that same distance around it. And we get something that's called the Vesica Piscis. which is the shape of our eye, right? It's when you have one circle overlapping another circle, like you see in like a Venn diagram. There's a space in the middle, which is called the vesica Pisces. Okay, the Pisces is the fish. Okay, and so when you see that Jesus fish, that Christian fish that's drawn on, like people put on the back of their cars and stuff, that's a
Yeah.
vesica Pisces. Okay, so
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
place where sacred geometry has worked its way into Christianity in like a very pragmatic way. Okay,
Yep.
so we have one circle, we have two circles, you do it again, you get three. Okay, now we get the Trinity, the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, the me, myself, and I, the deeper, the like body, mind, and soul. Are we picking up a pattern here, right? It's all
Wait,
patterns.
what? Yeah.
Yeah, it's all
I'm just
patterns.
kidding.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you scribe 6 of these circles around each other, what you get, you go around quickly, 6 days of creation. Okay. The 7th creates one circle around those 6. You get a hexagon. Okay. And we start to very quickly create a pattern that replicates. So we get these overlapping circles. The flower of life is becoming very, very, very present in the modern world. Most people now, if I say what's a flower of life, they have an idea what it is. Or if I show it to you, you've seen it before
Yeah.
because it's showing up more and more and more and more, right?
Yep.
And it's been
Yep.
around since antiquity, right? It's in China, ancient China. It's in ancient India. It's in ancient Africa, in Egypt. It's in ancient South America. It's everywhere. This one symbol of the flower of life is on all the temples and all the pyramids all around the world. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so how is it worldwide in these ancient places if we weren't traveling the world at those times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's in consciousness, because it comes from another place, because it comes from creation. So if you now take the masculine and add it back to all these circles and you draw straight lines connecting the centers of all the circles. Okay, I'll show you my tattoo so you can see what I'm
Yep.
talking about.
Yep.
Circles all around and you connect all the lines. You end up
Uh-huh.
with what looks like a Star of David.
Okay.
Another coincidence of a very powerful religious symbol
Yep.
coming from this sacred geometry. And what we get from the sacred geometry piece of the flower of life and Metatron's cube is we also get all 5 platonic solids: the hexagon, the tetrahedron,
Okay. Yep.
dodecahedron, the icosahedron. Which one did I skip? Anyways, we get all 5 of the platonic solids by tracing the lines out. So there's a very simple pattern that shows us where the fundamental building blocks of reality come from. And when we combine these with the mathematics of phi, of the golden ratio, we start to understand temperament. We start to understand sound. We start to understand light. Like we can see all these patterns come out of a few very basic fundamental concepts. Okay,
Yeah.
mathematical concepts. We're like, these are geometry. This is math. This is like, I'm not like telling you a story about a man in the sky. I'm like literally 1 + 1
Right.
= 2 = 3. Like here's a pattern, and it
Yeah.
shows us. We can look at the molecules that the earth, that our reality is made out of, and these are the shapes. And we can be like, it comes from this pattern. This is where how it creates. Okay, cool. So what? We see these building blocks is somebody made them, right? Like this is intelligent design has brought all this into being. So Jay's a curious guy. Right? I'm going to diverge into a story for a second here. Somewhere in my ayahuasca journey and throughout most of my life, being still angry because of that, losing my mom and my dad,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was very demanding of being in the spiritual journey of like searching. I'm searching for the answer. Like, I want to know. I want to know what this is about. And I can remember going to a ceremony and going deep into the journeying part of the visions of the ceremony. And I
Yeah.
remember going to the same kind of places that I've been before in my DMT and ayahuasca journeys. and being escorted around by entities and meeting other beings. And quick side note, my ayahuasca and DMT experiences, I've encountered dozens and dozens of deities, both known and unknown to me. So when I say known deities, I mean like Shiva or Vishnu, like Hindu deities that are well known in these spiritual contexts, along with Christian deities like Jesus or God or Christ, right? Like these concepts, along
Yeah.
with other deities that I have no idea who they are, but obviously very powerful beings that everything from like um, alien intelligences, like super smart, hyper intelligent alien beings, to like giant ogres, all types of different entities.
It's wild. It's just as
Yeah.
interjection, I have never had that experience in all of my experience with ayahuasca, which isn't too great, too vast, but it's always interesting to me where I'm like, okay, interesting. I wonder why. Not that there's anything right or wrong about it, but it's interesting to me that I have not, other than feeling like I really have been with ayahuasca. So I'd say that, she is the one that I have very clearly been like, oh, hey, you
Yeah.
are like, not that separation, not trying to say we're separate, but meaning she felt different than me. So it felt like
Totally.
a different, person almost, even though that's the wrong word for it. But
Different
yeah, yeah,
soul. Yeah. Yeah.
fascinating,
So,
fascinating. So anyway, go on.
some of my ayahuasca experiences have had zero visual, like absolutely no visual experience at all. So I don't want to like try to predict somebody's experience. Like
Sure.
if you're listening to this, don't expect visuals. Like I've gone for a multi-day ceremony and had like a zero visual where it's completely somatic, physical body, just, feeling like you
I
drank some
r-
medicine and now you feel
yeah,
like, I got to
I
process this.
rarely I rarely have visuals. Rarely. It's almost always auditory, but not. It's like knowing. It's like
Yeah.
words and it's a knowing. That's how it usually lands for me. Which feels to me very spiritual, like very
Yeah.
out of this world. It's sort of like in religious contexts when people are like, you just get touched by the hand of God or you have some epiphany of some kind. That if I had to describe it in parallel to some religious, frame, that's how it usually feels to me.
I'm going to jump back to that point in the story about being a very demanding and going into this one particular experience, as I want to share this experience because it was pivotal in my whole journey.
Yeah.
And it brings me kind of to like my today version of me and the practices that I hold now, and kind of how I found peace with God, which I think should be the title of this episode.
Yeah.
Because God and I were not at peace. I was a fuck you God, right? Like my place with God was fuck you until I found peace with God. Okay. And so the way that I found my way there was during one of my ayahuasca experiences. I basically sat there like a stubborn kid and was like, I've been here before. You've shown me around. I've seen lots of things. I know where I am. I'm like stubborn. I want to know who's in charge here. Like, I want to know who's in charge. Like, I want to see the great Oz. Where is the great Oz hiding behind the curtain? Because I've seen lots of deities. I've seen lots of conceptual, like beautiful things, and I've been to lots of worlds and spaces. But I want to see all. I want to talk to them, whoever's in charge. And this little being came up that was kind of like half my height and was like, "Hey, if you want me to introduce you to him, I can show you." And I was like, "Okay, let's go." And the way everything works in this realm is like, he felt like this little being like came down the hallway on my right and came up to me, and I turned to my right and I'm like, hey, okay, let's go. And it's like, we're going to turn around and go the other way, but the hallway like inverts itself and turns itself inside out, and we go the opposite way. And that's always the way it is in this journeys for me, is like, things are always the unpredicted. They're always like the unexpected. Like, we think we're going to go that way. Well, we're going this way. So we go to some, what I can best describe is like down a hallway to an office, right? Like some magical office, which looks like some of the temples in Saudi Arabia that I've seen, which are just beautiful adorned temples, right? Sacred geometry everywhere. And they're luminous and colorful and beautiful spaces and ever changing and almost liquid. And when the door opens and the little helper assistant is like, like kind of shows me in, and I'm like kind of nervous because I'm like, I'm going to see the man here, like who's in charge. And I go into this great big vast office, and there's a kind of like a giant mainframe computer interface in the wall and nothing else in the room. And I'm like kind of looking around nervously. I'm like kind of holding up a hand to like see if it notices that I'm there, kind of thing. I'm like, hey, I'm over here. And it doesn't care that I'm there, right? And I'm like, I feel like I'm kind of like in NASA headquarters, like all these screens everywhere.
Yeah.
And there's like it's like, it's Rocket Command, what do they call that?
Houston,
Yeah.
Command center or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's this massive command center, and then I'm like, hey, what's going on here? Like, what's going on here? And the little being is like, don't call it God. Don't. And it kind of whispers to me like, don't call it God. He doesn't like to be called God. And I was like, what? Don't call it God. It's like, its name is. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm getting is, like, it just is. And started to like understand this concept of just is. It just is. Okay. And there's another piece of this. I can go down a rabbit hole of is, and then the being Ra from Egypt, the great god Ra is Ra, and the being El, and some more pieces that tie into Judaism.
Okay. Right?
So back in space, we're in the office, and I'm like, it just is. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I'm kind of hearing this little joke in my head. I'm like, what is going on? Right. And I'm like, what is going on? And it basically is like, what do you want to know? And I'm like, what the fuck's going on here? Like, what is going on? Like, what? Tell me, explain it to me, show it to me. I'm like, I want to freaking know. And it basically said, fine, if you want to know, I'll show you. But you can't really, really know, because you're going to go back to your life and still not know. Even though you're going to know, you're still not going to know. And this is such a common thing in the psychedelic journey. It's like, you go to this journey, you come back, you're like, oh my God, I get it. And then you're like, God, wait, I had it. Oh no, shit, I lost it. Kind of thing.
Yeah.
It showed me the earth as like an inside of a giant containment field. Okay. And on the way there's all these warning signs, like big flashing, do not fuck with this. Don't break this. Don't touch this. This is like super important. This is like a high clearance area. Do not mess with this thing. And it showed me the earth and our reality inside of this containment field. And it showed me that there's a simulation taking place intentionally inside of that containment field, where it's running every potential outcome, where intentionally it's using these golden ratio potential curves. Every petal of the lotus flower is being explored. Every version is exponentially being explored. Both the bad, we would classify as bad, pain, death, dark, evil, and the good, the beautiful, the shiny, the white, the light, the dark, the black. Like, all of these things are intentionally being explored inside of a contained experiment as a simulation in order to protect the reality that is. So is has one job, and that job is for it to ensure its own safety, its own existence. And so it's running a simulation that can show the ways that it could go corrupt, the things that could corrupt the simulation, that could corrupt reality, right? And it's doing that in an intentional way, and it's pulling out the pieces of architecture, the code that it creates to bolster and sustain the architecture that is all that exists, that is. And it's acknowledging all the ones that are potential ways that the architecture could collapse on itself and destroy itself. And it's intentionally crushing those, like black hole, crushing them and destroying them and keeping all the good pieces. And all of that's happening in a containment field, which is the reality that we live in. And so when we see babies being murdered as an example of like, why the fuck would God do that?
Right.
It's like, well, we're exploring all the things that could possibly go wrong in the worst possible way so that we can make sure they don't happen in the real world. And so suddenly there's this understanding of like, why would you even run a simulation and call it and then there's all this simulation theory happening outside, back out of ayahuasca, back in normal life. I'm Jay Samoletsky. It says right on my screen right there. It's just my name. And now I have to say, why is all this here? And I'm like, okay, it's a simulation. It's not real. I'm not real. I'm just a piece of code in the simulation, and I'm going to expire because the program's only going to run for so long. But either way, it all just is, and it only has one job. And I was like, yeah, I get it. But what's outside of you is, that's nice. Show me the containment field. Show me the simulation. I get it. But what's outside of you? It is just doesn't understand. It didn't understand. It was like, there's just nothing outside of me. There is no other thing. And so even it is a singularity. And if there's there could be another reality beyond that. Right?
Wow.
So you come back down from the ayahuasca trip, you're like, oh my God, I saw the fucking answer to everything there is. And then this phrase comes to mind: chop wood, carry water.
Yeah.
And what's happened? My body's still going to get old. Even if I think I understand the way the universe works, and I can tell you a story that I, had in my experience with a spirit, right? Not from a book, my own personal experience, which I'm way more likely to believe than something I read in a book.
Same.
Okay.
Same.
My own personal experience tells me that this is all a simulation. So what do I do with it?
Yeah.
What do I do now? Okay.
Totally. That is the huge question in spirituality.
What do I do now?
What do you do? Yeah. Drink what? Chop wood, carry water, whatever it is.
Okay. So spiritual practice. Okay. So if I'm a program in an architecture that is going to shut itself down either way, do I want to be one of the versions that ends up crushed in the black hole or extracted and implemented in the architecture that is,
Yeah.
And so my decision to cover my body in sacred geometry tattoos, to live into my own royal divine masculinity, to embody spirituality, and to make daily practices of watching the sunrise and watching the sunset, and to care for my physical body like it's a temple, to eat like a king, to sleep like a log, like a stone, to do yoga and work out on a regular basis, to have meditation practices, to pray over every meal that I have and have gratitude, like to have deep gratitude, right? Like to sit with every time I have a meal with a friend, we hold hands and I take my hands of my friends every single meal and express gratitude for what's important to me in my life and for them. You know? And last night I was driving into town after a long day. I may see my skin's all red. I was out in the sun. I was so tired. I was so hungry. I was hangry, and my back really hurt. And I was going into town. I've been so busy. I won't go down this story, but I was so just done. So done. and I'm going into town to get a burrito because I'm starving. I'm hangry.
Yeah.
And a little town has like 3 stoplights, and there's a total backup, and I can see the flashing blue lights up ahead. I'm like, oh no, there's an accident. And I'm like, stop. And my body is so sore and in pain and tired and hungry. And it's like, fuck. God damn it. And my soul's like, hey, right away, so quick, so quick. Hey, calm down. There's somebody up there having a way worse day than you. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's so quick. Yeah, you're right. So I parked the van and jumped out. And I walked up the road to go get my burrito. And I walked past the accident scene on the way there. And there's a motorcycle underneath a truck. And somebody was having a way, way worse day. Right? Way worse day.
Yeah, I think part of the spiritual path, thank you for sharing all of that, by the way, are obviously, of course, the days when we are disconnected from it, the reconnection moments. What do those look like? If I had to go, okay, spiritual practice, and offer a thought from my own experience, it would be sort of that iterative thing where I actually, even though I don't always emotionally feel it, like the happiness or whatever for the opportunity of a life challenge or an emotional challenge, I'm in an emotional challenge. I think big picture, I'm grateful for the practice of getting to reconnect, knowing that helps me sort of do it with more and more ease every time I'm challenged. So I'm with you there, that whole like positive lens and gratitude. And yeah, you can get better at that as part of a spiritual practice, so that when you are met with something like what you just described, it comes up a lot more
Yeah.
readily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Death or injury, right? Like, so the death piece for me is like a really powerful thing. I think I've mentioned this before, and I want to bring this around to this point is I did a death meditation a couple of years ago, which I think we just talked about it the other day, was, write your eulogy, write your legacy, and that's like from like the omnipotent version, and then the eulogy is like third person, and then write your manifesto, right? And that practice of this death method, like really, like I'm gonna shout out to Brad Chatelier right here, because we chatted about this idea of like, live life like you have 2 to 3 years left all the time. Like if you have 2 or 3 years left, if you were like, it's almost over, it's going to end any day now. And it could be really soon, but I might have about 2 to 3 years. If we live like this, where I only have 2 or 3 years left to like be the version of me I want to be and do the things that I want to do and leave behind whatever legacy, whatever eulogy. And that means my manifesto for the next 2 to 3 years has to include whatever is really most important to me, And so that daily practice you're talking about, of like bringing it back to how does that look on the daily? What do we do to ground into our spirituality so that it's actually part of our daily routine, which is my physical body, my mental, emotional body, and my spiritual body? For me, that includes stopping, stillness, like Israel reminded us about, stillness, watching the sunrise, stopping to watch the sunset. I will park my car on the way home from the gym and watch the sunset. 5 minutes, just park and watch the sunset. For me, there is no greater acknowledgement of the universal occurrence, which is God and us and the universe connected, than to stop and watch it happen. Like literally watch it, and it's ending. The day is ending because there's only so many of these. And if we can observe them beginning and ending, that simple cadence of like a connective pulse just like our heart pulses, right? To like, there's a pulse of the universe. The sun comes around and it disappears again. Watching the sunrise and the sunset, tuning into the cycles of nature, embracing the seasons as they change, of loving of nature, we've talked about an extent, and chopping wood, carrying water, knowing that it's just all going to end, and going, fuck, I have like such a short time left. How am I going to treat Mel when she's having a hard day? I'm just going to be grateful for her.
Yeah,
You know,
totally.
how am I going to treat me?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to add one thing because this has been an interesting concept that's come into my world recently. It's also on the more pragmatic, practical front, but also as a mindset perception tool. But this notion of resume values versus eulogy values. And so, like, we are not usually, if you think about how people are remembered, they're not going to go, Melanie Curtis, you know, traveled this much or did this many skydives or wrote a book or whatever. She's going to be like, they're going to be
How
like,
does she make you feel?
she was like a light in this world. She loved people. She showed up for her friends and family. She, like, what are the eulogy values? And because if you're really like, oh, I don't know about this spirituality thing, you don't have to even go there. You can start from a place like that where you're like, what for me would I want people saying about me after I'm gone? And it is connected to this concept of legacy, but I say it more from the perspective of helping us make decisions in this complex, stressful, rigorous world that we do live in. So I love that.
And that I will thank you for simplifying it, because a lot of what story that I told today has so much complexity and so much detail, and there's so much, like, just infinite facets of the jewel, right? Like the layers of the onion, the facets of the jewel, the flowers of the petals of the flower. There's so much to it, but the simplicity, chopping wood or carrying water, like, what does that mean? Is like ritual practice. What's a ritual practice? Something we do every single day or with regularity. So including putting some ritual around things in our life, like saying, I love you,
Yeah.
like saying thank you,
The
like
gratitude at the
feeling
meal. Yeah.
gratitude at our meal, like pausing. My gosh, pause is like a skill. It's such a beautiful skill to, like, when you bring pause and just stop for a second
Yeah. Or
and
even just
just be there.
slow down. If stillness, slowness, all that stuff. Yeah. Otherwise, it's really hard to connect to that pulse of the universe, like you said. Oh, thank you, my friend. Good. Beautiful. Yes. Chop wood,
I'm gonna leave
carry
us
water.
with I'm going to
Chop
leave
wood,
us
carry
with a
water.
couple of little things for people to think about as examples that they might want to work into their life.
I love it.
Yeah. One of them is adornment, which is things like jewelry, carrying things like, how many people wear a cross around their neck, right?
Mm-hmm.
Adornment is a very powerful piece of spirituality. Carrying an amulet, something that is of meaning to you, something that matters, that you carry for because it feels special. I keep some of my friends' ashes on a little altar. And so having an altar or a shrine is a very powerful way. Even when I'm traveling now, I take a little travel version of my altar with me, which is just
Wow.
a few special things. I have a stone, I have a feather, I have a couple, special ornaments that I carry around because they connect me and ground me to something that I know is beyond me, like a stone and a feather, right? That stone, where did it come from? What's its story? What's its life? How did it come to be, right? That feather, where has it flown, right? And they help me. And the shrine, the altar, the adornment, these are things that have been through antiquity, right? Like, these are parts of spirituality. You can find them in every single version of spirituality. every religion, they all embody this, like, hey, there's really simple practices, like get some things that's special and connect to that. So yeah,
I love it. I
the
love it.
flame, the candle,
Yeah, I love
candle.
it. I think it's so important to make accessible entry points. And I think those are beautiful ideas for people because I don't necessarily, I do that, like most of the things that I wear, like even this little brooch on my sweat, my hoodie is just a vintage thing. I got at some thrift store. There were two of them. I got one for my mom and I kept one for myself. So it's like that type of stuff is just, I do it, but to pose it as something like, hey, if you're not doing this, it might help. That's just such a great place to end on. And this conversation could go on forever
As it
the
will.
as the yeah, as the
As it
flower of
will.
life does.
Yeah.
But I
The
love it.
journey.
I
Yeah.
love it. I appreciate you sharing all that because that is, yeah, I'm just like, ooh, I feel I feel glad to have like really revisited that. I've said it earlier, but to have revisited it now as this person that I am versus probably the last time we talked about it, which I was more like, oh God, that's just too far beyond my brain.
If I can, influence anybody, if I want to, so that's my legacy. Here's my legacy ask, right? Like, is if I want my eulogy to read like, hey, he helped me to get more in touch with my physical body, to be more present to my own mind, and to relate to my own spirituality.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for being here
Thank you.
today. Thanks for
Thank
listening.
you, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Melanie.
life.
Thank you, animate forces hiding behind everything.
Thank you, little dude that helped Jay know what is.
Yeah. We love you all. Thanks for listening.
Love you. Thank you, everyone, seriously, for listening, for spending your valuable, valuable time, energy, and heart with us. Every bit of it makes a difference.
Yeah, thank you. We would love it if you could show your support for the show by subscribing on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, or follow us on Instagram. You can always click the like button, leave us a comment, or share an episode with somebody directly.
Like we mentioned, every month we host integration coaching circles. So much good work is happening there. You are invited to join us. Go to trustthejourney.today/integration. The Trust the Journey family includes these integration coaching circles and our private Facebook group where we connect and support each other. Join us by going to our website, trustthejourney.today, and click the orange Patreon button.
Yeah, thanks. It's your support and engagement that make the show possible. Thank you. We're here to connect with you. Feel free to DM us anytime on Instagram. We're at trustthejourney.today. Thank you. We love you.
We love you.
Keep laughing, keep loving, and keep trusting the journey.